My name is Robert Siepken. Welcome to my presentation about Mexico's Constitution of 1917. I hope you'll find this video informative and useful. One of the very most important outcomes of the Mexican Revolution that took place from 1910 to 1920 was the implementation of the Constitution of 1917. This is the Constitution which is still in effect in Mexico today, even though it's been amended over and over and over. In fact, it's been amended comfortably more than 200 times. The wording contained in the National Constitution provides, in my opinion, a look into the heart and soul of a country. For that reason, I'm going to spend some time discussing what is contained within the Mexican Constitution of 1917. There are some similarities with our own American Constitution, but there are some big differences in terms of how they viewed organized religion and the church. Much, perhaps most of the Constitution of 1917 was based on precedents set earlier in the previous Constitution of 1857, which was seriously secular. In addition, the 1917 Constitution tried to provide guarantees to abolish and prevent the abuses Mexicans had experienced during the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz from 1876 to 1911. First, though, here's an overview of some of the guarantees in the Constitution that line up pretty well with our own Constitution. Freedom of expression. During Porfirio Diaz's dictatorship, freedom of expression, including journalists, was seriously oppressed unless, of course, your expression was in support of Porfirio. It's been claimed, for example, that one particular journalist was jailed right around 200 times while Porfirio was in office. But the Constitution of 1917 set out to right that wrong. This article had precedent in the previous Constitution of 1857, but Porfirio's dictatorship had found various and different ways to dismiss it. Peaceful assembly. Article 9 of this new Constitution guaranteed Mexican citizens, quote, the right to peacefully associate or assembly for any licit purpose cannot be restricted. Only citizens of the Republic may take part in the political affairs of the country. No armed meeting has the right to deliberate, end quote. Unfortunately, over time, a political monopoly in Mexico called the PRI found ways to water down this article during the rest of the 20th century. Lawful search and seizure. This guarantee mirrors our own American constitutional rights in this regard, and I'll quote from the Constitution, only a judicial authority can issue a search warrant at the request of the Public Prosecution Service. The search warrant must describe the place to be searched, the person or persons to be apprehended, and the objects to be seized. Upon the conclusion of a search, a report must be compiled at the site and before two witnesses proposed by the occupant of the place searched, or in his absence or refusal by the acting authority, end quote. Cruel and unusual punishment, the death penalty. These days, if you hear of a Mexican national accused of murdering somebody here in the United States, but the Mexican manages to escape and flee to Mexico, it's likely the United States, understandably, will request their extradition back to the United States to face charges. But because the death penalty in Mexico has by now been ruled completely unconstitutional, Mexico won't even think of doing that unless and until the death penalty is taken off the table. Mexico completely abolished the death penalty in 2005, but the Constitution of 1917 did set the stage for that. And I quote, Article 22, punishment by mutilation and infamy, branding, flogging, beating with sticks, torture of any kind, excessive fines, confiscation of property, and any other unusual or extreme penalties are prohibited. Capital punishment for political offenses is likewise prohibited. As regards other offenses, it can only be imposed for high treason committed during a foreign war, parricide, the murder of your parents, murder that is treacherous, premeditated, or committed for profit, arson, abduction, highway robbery, piracy, and grave military offenses. No double jeopardy. Double jeopardy in Mexico means the same thing as it does here in the US. Simply put, if you're found not guilty of an accusation, you can't be tried again for the same crime. Along with that, I find this interesting, their constitution included a restriction on the number of times you could be tried at all. And I quote, Article 23, no criminal trial shall have more than 3 instances. Okay, end quote. So now we're moving along here. Articles number 3, 27, 123, and 130 are in different ways unlike our American Constitution. Article 3 talks about education. It's to be free, obligatory, and secular public education is to be free from clerical supervision, and it's secularized the Mexican state. So this aspect of the Constitution deals with education. It goes even deeper into its anti-clerical stance. Here's an excerpt about this particular issue that comes across to me as kind of pointed. Quote, the education imparted by the federal state shall be designed to develop harmoniously all the faculties of the human being, and shall foster in him at the same time a love of country and a consciousness of international solidarity in independence and justice. Freedom of religious beliefs being guaranteed by Article 24, the standard which shall guide such education shall be maintained entirely apart from religious doctrine, and based on the results of scientific progress, shall strive against ignorance and its effects, servitudes, fanaticism, and prejudices. Article 27 deals with land issues. Communal ownership of rural lands had almost been wiped out during the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz by different laws that allowed and facilitated speculators to commandeer these lands. Article 27, then, was intended to right that wrong. It gave the government the authority to expropriate land from large landholders and then distribute it back to eligible agrarian communities. It forbade foreigners from owning land within 100 kilometers of a national border. So in other words, a land border, or 50 kilometers of the sea. So lands in Mexico for which foreigners are prohibited from buying are very aptly referred to as restricted zones. Because historically so much of Mexican territory had been stolen or commandeered away from Mexico by foreign nations, these restricted zones were intended to act as buffer zones against possible foreign encroachment. The secession of Texas in 1836, Mexico's loss of what is now the entire southwestern United States to the United States as a result of the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848, the Gadsden Purchase in 1854, the sale of Belize in the late 1800s. These had all taught Mexico the hard lesson it needed to protect its borders and its coastlines. In 1991, 1992, Article 27 went through some serious changes with regard to land reform. Here's an excerpt about this radical change from a journal article by the Notre Dame Law School. Quote, on November 7th, 1991, President Salinas formally proposed to Mexico's federal legislature that Article 27's guarantees of land for landless rural communities, as well as its prohibitions on the ownership of rural land by corporations, be deleted. These constitutional revisions not only ended redistribution of land, but also paved the way for mass transfer of rural land from indigenous communities to multinational food corporations, end quote. So, seems likely to me these radical changes, these deletions, were in anticipation of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was implemented January of 1994. Moving along to Article 123, which dealt with labor, as you can see on the slide, it established for an 8-hour workday, a 6-day work week, minimum wage, equal pay for equal work. These all come across as completely reasonable and fair. It gave labor the right to organize. Workers could bargain collectively and strike. Here's how a manufacturing organization named Novalink describes this article of the Constitution, quote, "In other words, all Mexicans have the right by law to access a job in conditions that favor their growth and development. In addition, working conditions must be healthy and safe. Not maintaining such an environment signifies that the employer is breaking the law." End quote. Well, the intent of this article was to ensure that debt, servitude, and slavery that had been practiced, in fact, during Porfirio's dictatorship, were explicitly made illegal anywhere and everywhere in Mexico. Article 130 deals with religion. Article 130 deals with religion and its place in society, and it was heavily influenced by 3 precedents that were anti-clerical in nature. These precedents took place back in the late 1850s during a period that came to be known for its profound secular reforms. There was the so-called Ley Juarez of 1855, Ley Lerdo of 1856, and then the Constitution of 1857. As such, this article places emphasis on separation of church and state. In fact, the first sentence in the article makes this clear, quote, "The historic principle of separation between the state and religion shall guide the provisions established in this article." Churches now had to register with the Mexican government. So churches and religious groups weren't even considered legal unless and until they successfully completed a registration process. And the registration process was written and administered by, guess who? The government. Ministers of all kinds, different religions, priests, imams, pastors, are able to vote. They just can't hold public office unless and until they leave the ministry. And I'll just read from the Constitution, quote, "Religious ministers cannot hold public offices according to the statutory law. As citizens, religious ministers have the right to vote, but they do not have the right to be elected. Those who have ceased being church ministers with the required anticipation and by the procedures established in the law may be elected." End quote. Ministers can't get involved in politics while they're still ministers. They can't pronounce themselves for or against anybody. Again, I'll read from the Constitution for this bullet point. "Church ministers cannot join together for political purposes, nor proselytize in favor of a certain candidate, party, or political association, or against them. Neither may they oppose the laws of the nation or its institutions, nor insult patriotic symbols in any form in public meetings, in worship, or in religious literature. And they can't inherit from their church members." So in this regard, again, here's what the Constitution says, quote, "Church ministers, their ascendancy, children, siblings, and spouses, as well as their religious associations, cannot inherit by will from their followers," here's the caveat, "who do not have a family relationship of up to 4th grade," end quote. So apparently the caveat here is, if you're a church minister, you do have the ability to inherit from a church member if they are a family member and if they're in the 5th grade or older. Interesting. I came across this chart here while I was researching this section. It's a chart that shows the total number of constitutional amendments for each of the presidents of Mexico, as well as the average number of amendments per year. To date, there have been comfortably more than 200 amendments to Mexico's constitution, which is 106 years old. That compares to 27 amendments to our American Constitution, which is much older, 231 years old. Well, as you can see from this table, amendments to Mexico's constitution have been a lot more frequent since 1970. Why is that? Well, that's about the same time Mexico started having more trouble with its economy than normal, and it started to experience quite a bit more trouble in terms of social activism. Well, as you can see down at the bottom of the slide, it looks like the grand prize winner for the total number of constitutional amendments during a presidential term in Mexico belongs to Felipe Calderón. President Calderón served as president from 2006 to 2012, and there was a total of 38 constitutional amendments during his 6 years in office. Well, thanks for tuning into this overview of some of the aspects of Mexico's Constitution of 1917, and I hope you all have a great day.